Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast. I am honored to have registered dietitian, nutritionist, certified eating disorder specialist, and intuitive eating counselor, Robyn Goldberg, with us today. Robyn, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to pick your brain. Robyn is very well known in her field, and I'm very excited to have her on my podcast to discuss all things disordered eating and eating disorder so that we can help some people out there who might be struggling. And remember, if you do, there's going to be some links and some numbers you can call if you are thinking that you or a loved one might have an eating disorder. So I'm going to read a little bit about Robyn, and then we're going to get into our questions. Robyn Goldberg is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, certified eating disorder specialist, intuitive eating counselor, and health at every size or HAES practitioner. She began her career at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, focusing on cardiology and gastroenterology before transitioning into private practice. For more than 20 years, she has worked with individuals struggling with medical conditions, eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image concerns. Her private practice in Beverly Hills also serves individuals with dual diagnoses, fertility issues, and those recovering from chronic dieting. That is a lot of what I see in my practice as well. She provides supervision to other professionals, speaks nationally at conferences, and contributes to media outlets, including the New York Times, Shape, and Today's Dietitian. Robyn is also the author of The Eating Disorder Trap, a guide for clinicians and loved ones, and has been featured in numerous television and podcast interviews. Robyn, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here with you.
Yes, definitely. So I always like to start off with a little bit of background so people understand what inspired you to take the route that you're taking, what led you to doing the work that you're doing now. And I'd also love to hear more about your book.
Sure. So I chose my profession based on my family history of heart disease and high cholesterol. My dad was alive at the time, and growing up, always hearing about anemia. Everyone in my family hereditarily has it. I've had it since I was 12, and it was just the message that we grew up with. And I initially started out as an exercise physiology major, but couldn't handle the cadavers in school. So I migrated into dietetics as I realized I was a collegiate tennis player, that was it. My career was ending in college. I was not going to be professional, so really had to kind of figure out what my career path would be moving forward. So my family history is what initially inspired me to choose the path of dietetics.
Oh, I love that. I think we do have some similarities as well. I started in the fitness industry myself, and I can really relate to working on the cadavers. That was not something that I enjoyed, something that was very educational, but certainly wasn't a path that I wanted to go down. And dietetics just provided the healthcare without the access to fluids and things like that.
For sure. I mean, it was really like, okay, if I actually think about what I'm putting in my body, perhaps my performance will be better or different and have a different outcome. And that was discussed too. So that was another kind of motivating factor.
I love this. How did you transition then? You went from Cedars-Sinai doing some more medical nutrition therapy and transferred into private practice and started to work with eating disorders and wrote your book. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I knew from the time I was in school, I wanted to be in private practice, but it was told to me repeatedly, you can't just like hang up your shingle. It's important to be able to obtain that experience. So I gave myself a 5-year benchmark of really trying to become well-versed, well-rounded, and just obtain as much experience as I could. As when I started out, I only wanted to be the dietitian for the Lakers, always wanted to work in sports nutrition. It's really awesome to see how I've expanded and I have many interests in area of specializations. And I had worked at the same time, actually, I was the nutrition director at an outpatient eating disorder program, an IOP. And that interest started because three of my roommates, when I was at Sonoma State, that's where I started playing tennis, all had bulimia nervosa. So I would fall asleep at night to them purging. And that was my exposure and introduction initially. So I knew private practice would be the long haul. It was obtaining that experience. And Supatra, when we start out, we really want to be able to get as much experience as we can. So then we can really hone in on what our niche would be.
Yes, absolutely. So, how did your work transition into your authoring your book?
So throughout my career, probably similarly to you, you'll hear colleagues and friends and family say, well, when are you going to put out a book? And I've always been, like, I would say, the publicist for all of our colleagues promoting this book and that book. And I had decided if I was ever going to write a book, I wanted to write a book that was different from the books that existed in the field. And what I mean by that is something that could be user friendly to all, not just clinicians, not just family members, be written in a way that you don't have to have a PhD. It could be the checker at the grocery store could read. And I decided growing up, my brother was an avid comic book collector, and I found being a visual learner, seeing pictures oftentimes could describe something if one was not able to comprehend what the message would be. So I had interviewed illustrators that could embrace all different body shapes and sizes and really be inclusive to all, as opposed to the typical stigmatizing illustrator where it's like a large head and smaller body. So I had decided I really had a variety of topics I wanted to discuss and to be able to have illustrations before each subject matter that can then be a deep dive in on what that subject matter would be written in a very general, basic way.
I love this. I agree with you. That's how I wrote my book. I wanted it to be accessible for everyone and something that was easily digestible and pretty clear cut for anybody who picks that up. So, what do you hope people get out of reading your book?
Well, I think to be able to first understand that you can't look at someone and determine if they have an eating disorder, since eating disorders affect all ages, all genders, all body shapes and sizes, as opposed to the assumption that it's a specific individual that has an eating disorder. So I always like to say, you walk into a room, anyone in that room could have an eating disorder. You walk into a grocery store, anyone in there could have one. So that's the first part. Also, questions that would be beneficial if you are a coach, if you are a religious figure, if you are a physician, that can be beneficial to incorporate in your conversations with folks, as well as body language, I think can be very telling, like really learning how to be mindful and change the body language, because sometimes that could be very activating for people. And also really to understand like what's going on through one's mind and medically, how every body part is impacted. So there was a lot I was really hoping to achieve. And look, I feel like anyone that picks it up, it can help them, whether they're a client or they have a loved one struggling or they're a guardian.
Yes. How did you come up with the title of your book?
Good question. I don't think anyone's asked me that before.
Wow.
Well, the original title, I'm going to tell you. So I was working with a trademark lawyer and I learned that you can't just like pick a title. It has to be researched to see if it is available. So the original title, and I'm glad I have my title, was actually The Hunger Games. So my trademark lawyer was in touch with the Hunger Games trademark lawyer. I had a whole email with the author. And as I had explained, like what this was about, of course, there was a no-go based on like because the book, the film. So by looking, and I'll just grab. So on the eating disorder trap, so there's a number of things I learned between metaphor of color and in it. So the background, I'm not sure if you can tell what the background actually is, Supatra, but the background is a vortex. It's the black hole. And this is showing that a person's going down. And so as you are going up, the color lightens, and this shows that there is hope and there is a way out. And trap is like you're in serious trouble. So I learned, probably like you, that you want to have a catchy title, not have so many words. And I had a number of titles that I was between, but this was actually it. And the vortex was my husband's brainchild, because initially when I had hired the designer for the book cover, first the covers, I was like, "Oh, this looks like an astrology science book in the galaxy." So it's really cool to see how it came to life. And that's just kind of a snapshot in how I came up with the title and the whole design.
Yes, and I think that there is a certain trap that people fall into when they're kind of descending toward an eating disorder. And if you could identify some of the traps that people might fall into, what would they be?
I think one of the ones that's very common right now is this term with like clean eating. I always like to say, and I joke when I say this to clients, if you're wanting clean food, put it under the faucet, give it a rinse. But I think diet culture has marketed and branded. And I was listening to someone yesterday, and probably at least 6 times in like 10 minutes, he was like, "Well, when I'm eating clean and it's, I think, unfortunately, people have these feelings if they're not eating a certain way, then they have failed, and they are kind of going down this dark path. So I think that's one of the areas for sure. I think also people looking quote unquote normal or living in larger bodies, and their providers or friends have no idea that they have disordered eating or thinking, and or they could be pretty entrenched in self-obstructive behaviors, and because they like look normal, they don't appear emaciated, and that might not be just what their body's geography is.
Yeah, exactly.
Anatomy, geography.
Uh, yeah, I identify some of the same traps that people might fall into, such as clean eating, which then leads to something I think more insidious, especially if it's causing a lot of distress and impairment, which is orthorexia nervosa. Now, a lot of people don't know what that is, and it's certainly not in the DSM, although it should be, and pretty much every dietitian and clinician agrees with that. But how does clean eating transfer into orthorexia, and what define orthorexia
Sure.
for our listeners?
Yeah, so orthorexia nervosa is the obsession to eat healthy. It's taking health to an uber unhealthy place. The term was coined by Dr. Stephen Bratman, and I look at my bookshelf because I'm like, oh, the book is yellow now. That's how old it is. Health food junkies, the obsession to eat healthy. And where basically it's taking the pleasure away from eating, where a person has become extremely rigid, where it has to be organic, it has to be paleo, it has all these rigid parameters. And if it does not fall within these parameters, then they're essentially paralyzed and not able to be flexible and adaptable and eat choices that would be available if it doesn't fall within this like healthism to the oomph degree where they literally are not able to live full and rich lives.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a few clients that have suffered from this. I would be very curious on
Just
the
a
diet.
few?
Well, I have presentations across the board for sure and have had several. But I would be really curious from your standpoint and from the dietetic standpoint, what are some helpful and effective ways to steer yourself clear from orthorexia? Or if you're in that kind of clean eating health movement, how you can keep from going down into that spiral towards orthorexia?
So I'm going to add a little humor to that, because at first my initial reaction was like, don't live in Los Angeles. Don't be in Beverly Hills. I mean, I was listening to a client the other day who's going to college here, who is from the Midwest. And he told me his clean eating, his eating disorder has exacerbated since coming here, as opposed to, so I was joking, but I'm being serious, because I think when you're in large mainstream cities, especially where, we're in the land of entertainment and Hollywood, and even if you do not work in that industry, it's like we are bombarded by it. I think there is an additional pressure to eat or look or be a certain way. So I think really having horse blinders on, and I say this because when you leave this little 5-mile bubble, still, it's maybe a little different, but it's like, go out into the Midwest. I just think, I don't know if you're from LA, but I was born and raised in Beverly Hills. So I have lived in it and seen the changes, but lived in other states for my dietetic internship and college, et cetera. So I think it's really eye-opening when I lived in the South for my dietetic internship, it was very different. And I remember my father would always say to me when I moved to Virginia for that 1.5 dietetic internship, every girl that grows up in Beverly Hills should have this experience, because I had a rotation in the state penitentiary. I mean, there was not an Erewhon. Whole Foods was not in existence. It was Mrs. Gooch's. It was just very normal and not hyped up, where you feel like you have to be put together to go to a grocery store here.
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate. I'm not from Los Angeles, I'm from Colorado. And the emphasis growing up, it really wasn't that. I'm very lucky to grow up in Boulder, and it was just a really diverse group of people and very sporty. So if anything,
I was going to say, it's very athletic, and it's like, I feel like where I should have been.
Yes, exactly. It was a really lovely place to grow up, and then wasn't devoid of people suffering from eating disorders. Actually, the person that inspired me to do this work was somebody from my hometown who experienced bulimia nervosa, like you did with your classmates. And I was shocked because I had no idea you could have a problem with food. I just ate, and then I was not hungry, and I stopped eating. And
Right.
it just was natural. And it was very eye-opening.
Your day and thoughts, basically, is what you're.
No, but not until moving out here. I worked in the entertainment industry. I came from that in Colorado. And in Colorado, it really wasn't like it was out here. And my emphasis wasn't on being as skinny as I could possibly be or anything like that. But moving out here, certainly everything was so centered around looks. And really, when you look at that kind of ideal, it was all emaciation at the time. The thinness was so extreme, kind of what we're back to now, which I want to talk to you about in the second half of this podcast. I really want to get into what's happening culturally now. But it was just a quagmire of lookism and weightism. And so there's so many reasons, but you don't even have to live in Los Angeles. You really just have to be on social media, honestly, to start to acquire some of these more negative thought patterns, these behaviors, and all of the horrible emotions that come from consuming content that is really destructive to our mental health. And that's something I talk about in my book. And certainly that's the work I do a lot with my clients, is how to put those horse blinders on. I think it's so important. And I think it's so important that people understand that they can curate their social media feed. They can really start to weed out the influences that are making them feel terrible and put in the more inspiring content, like Kevin Bacon singing to his goats. That's one of my favorite things on earth. But back to the way that you treat people. You do integrate medical nutrition therapy, intuitive eating, and HAES, health at every size principles. How does this help people across all of the spectrum of eating disorders?
I'm glad that you asked that, Supatra, because since coming from I would say the University of Cedars-Sinai, I see many people with medical issues. And when I started my career is when the first edition of intuitive eating came out. So, for example, when you're seeing someone who's in renal insufficiency and they're trying to avoid dialysis, they're not going to physically feel if they are having more protein than their kidneys will handle, as opposed to if you're someone with diabetes, you're able to physically, especially as you're paying attention to your body, be more aware when your glucose levels are rising due to having more grams of carbohydrate than your body's capable of burning off, essentially. So I teach all my clients, whether they're medical nutrition therapy or disordered eating or eating disorders, they all learn how to be intuitive eaters. And I say this because for many of them, they've had fear instilled into them by their physician of being given a laundry list of, don't eat this, do have that. So I find a lot of my job is to repair their thoughts and have them not be fearful of food with re-educating them, especially when they've been like given a handout and they're like, well, I was told don't eat this. And isn't this quote unquote bad for me? So I feel like I'm putting out a lot of fires and giving them the choice to say, like, you know what, let's experiment. Let's see what it would feel like when you're having more of X, Y, and Z. Do you feel like you're having more loose stools? Are you having a flare up with your Crohn's, with your colitis? So I really like to approach it from that angle, with having them go through the place of curiosity, and being able to quiet that inner critic, of course, takes time, but really being able to look at, like, no one knows what works best for your body but you. I don't live in your body. Your doctor doesn't live in your body. And really being able to create a sense of kindness and self-compassion, really, because I think, like, when we're critical and judgmental, where does that get us? So I really like to celebrate the wins with whomever I'm sitting with, no matter how small or how large they are. Like I was discussing with a client 2 days ago, I see a lot of males. I'm thinking of another male, and he was talking about how there was not this specific binge that happened. And he was speaking about what he had done. And I was like, look, there's like 3 things you just described that were you actively trying to be in the moment and think about what you could do differently. And I think oftentimes if one has this idea, sort of like the orthorexia part, if they're not doing it quote unquote perfectly or to these standards, they have failed. And as I always like to speak about, and there's that famous illustration that speaks about how recovery is not linear. I describe it as the waltz. You're taking several steps forward, you're taking several steps backwards, and you're going to have more forwards over time, but it is definitely up and down and cyclical.
Yes. Oh my goodness. You and I are so aligned. I think that one area that people, when they struggle with disordered eating or eating disorders, is actually becoming kind of dissociated from their body. They're not listening to their hunger cues. They're often not listening to their fullness cues as well. And they tend to intellectualize their kind of health journey as opposed to embody their health journey. And when they start to reconnect with their body and actually learn how to trust their body signals, I like to say sometimes the mind can be a jerk, but the body really loves you.
Mm.
When they really understand all of the signals that are coming from their body, and that's where their mindfulness and intuitiveness plays a key role, they can start to become their own best expert and understand exactly what their body needs, because your body's just going to tell you that. And I think looking at that from that health at every size lens, really trying to kind of erase the old medical model of thinness equals health, because we know that's actually not true. We do know that if you do go past a certain point in terms of obesity, you are more prone to metabolic disorders and things like that. But that doesn't necessarily translate for everybody. And I think that's where medicine can get it wrong. And I really like what you say about people coming in, they have their do's and don'ts from their doctors. I find that as dietitians, and me as a psychologist and dietitian, I'm kind of constantly coming across misinformation coming from the medical community, especially when it comes to weight loss and nutrition. So before we end this half of the podcast, how do you help clients navigate that if they're coming in and they're receiving advice from their doctor, but their doctor may actually be giving some misinformation?
So the first thing I always like to say, because I find this kind of has carried over just with another providers. So I like to use the term larger bodies and smaller bodies because it's offensive and stigmatizing to call someone quote unquote obese. So it's different if they identify as I am quote unquote a fat person. But with many people having lack of confidence and trust in their bodies, they will fall down this path or go down this path of, oh, my doctor's right. Saying like, I'm at this size. I'm not worthy and deserving to eat food that tastes delicious to me. So I really like to educate and reframe that all bodies deserve to be able to have food that nourishes them, but also all bodies deserve to have what I call vitamin J, food that gives them joy, that's fun, whether it's chips or gummy bears. I think really looking at, will that give me long-term sustaining energy is the way my sandwich would? No, but to be able to say, and I think part of it too is if we're quote unquote picky eaters, which I know we're going to talk about, or if there was this restriction or being denied or not having access to it a younger part in their life where they were not allowed to eat these different foods. I have many adults that have the palates of children because they want to eat what they want when they want and not have anyone tell them that they can or cannot have it or we don't have access to it as well. So it's really being able to look at like, do you feel like this is going to allow you to focus when you're at work? Is it giving you brain power when you're studying for exams? Is it affecting your sleep? So I really get into just essential like existence and how you are feeling when you're eating gummy bears and chips all day long with caffeine as opposed to having like real food. You're having sandwiches, you're having a burrito, you're having a bowl, you're having a salad, etc. And really being able to explain like what that looks like.
Absolutely. And I think we as dietitians can also gently help to educate doctors who may not necessarily have as much nutritional education. I remember during my dietetics, no, this was actually when I was working as a clinical dietitian. One lady who was in a coma for actually quite a while was only getting B fluids, and this was on her perhaps like seventh day. And I was trying to explain to the doctor that she needed to get on some medical nutrition therapy. And he said to me, well, it's okay. She can just live off her fat stores.
Mm.
And so I had to have a sit down moment with him and explain to him exactly why she needed nutrition.
Yeah.
And I think if we can help the medical community destigmatize the way, that people in larger bodies are treated, we certainly can improve their health outcomes better than we can ever do by shaming them. So I'm so glad that you're doing this work, and it is so important. I can't believe we're out of time. I have so many questions for you. And like I said, we were just going to riff, and we did. So you're going to come back for the second half of this podcast interview. And you all, we are so honored to have registered dietitian nutritionist, certified eating disorder specialist, intuitive eating counselor, and HAES practitioner, Robyn Goldberg. So come back, everyone, for the second half. Thanks, Robyn.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.